We can edit it as well. We're going to put it online after probably this afternoon or something. So
all right.
Hopefully we'll have some people pour in here. And hopefully Ruba will be here shortly. Awesome. Okay. While people are coming in, we just got your book Constellation Route, and we've been using it a lot in my classroom for sure. My students are writing epistolary poems right now, so
awesome.
Using you as a model a lot.
Yeah, thanks for sharing the poems.
Yeah, it's always a standby. Okay, so we'll go ahead. Well, I guess we should probably wait for Ruba here. I'm hoping that
I can text her. Hold on a second.
Yeah. Oh, here she is. She just popped off. Very cool. Hello.
Hello. Hi, Mark. Hi, Matthew.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing good. Very cool. We're about to get started here, so might as well just jump right in. So I just want to take a minute or two to thank everybody for coming today who's arrived into the Zoom session today. We'll be putting these readings online after the reading, probably by the afternoon of the reading. So it'll always be there. If you didn't get a chance to, you have to bow out early, or if you want to share with friends and family, it's always going to be there for you. But I also want to quickly thank a few folks, because this doesn't happen by itself. We have Jim Stick, who's our Dean of Liberal Arts, who's been supporting this reading series for almost 20 years now. So we exist because of him. And we also want to give out a shout out to our local bookstore, Beaverdale Books, who's been buying up all these books from these writers that were on sale. So you should probably go check them out and buy a book from the local independent bookstores. But today we have a poetry reading with Matthew Olsman and Ruba Ahmed, who will be sharing their work with us momentarily. If you've never attended a webinar or you haven't been a part of our reading series yet, just to give you a really quick overview of what you're looking at, is that we can't see your face, but we can hear you. So we have a chat available in place of any kind of audience interaction. So type in questions. We've had some pretty fun interactions sometimes via the chat. So it'll just be a running dialogue as we continue. So feel free to put something in there to make your voice heard. If you want to be more formal about it, which is awesome, we also have a Q&A Dropbox. So nobody can see those questions except for me. And by the end of these reading today, we'll hopefully have time to answer some of those questions. So anytime you feel free, anytime you have a question, just pop it into the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible by the end. All right. But I'm going to start off with some introductions before our readers read to us, and before we have a little conversation about their work. We'll start off with, I gotta pull my notes up here, Matthew Olsman, who is the author of 3 collections of poems from Alice James Books: Mezzanines, which was selected for the Kunima Prize, Contradictions in Design, and Constellation Route. His writing has appeared in Best American Poetry, Kenyon Review, New England Review, and elsewhere. He's been awarded fellowships from the Corsage Arts Foundation, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and the MacDowell Colony. Currently, he teaches at Dartmouth College and in the MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson. Ruba Ahmed is the author of Bring Now the Angels, with poems featured in the New York Times Magazine. Her debut book of poetry, Dhaka Dusk, won the Bakeless Prize from Grey Wolf. Her poems have appeared in the Kenyon Review, New England Review, and Plowshares, and elsewhere. She's also been anthologized in the Best American Poetry and been the recipient of the Florida Review's Editors Award and a fellowship from the Bread Loaf Writers Conference as well. She holds a degree from University of Pittsburgh and Warren Wilson, where she has recently joined the faculty. So I just want to welcome you guys and thank you so much for being a part of our series. All right, we'll start off with a quick broad question, just to kind of talk about your work. And before we hear, I guess, the final products in a moment, I'd be interested in knowing what your process is as you go into approaching a poem. Now, I know that's like a huge question, right? But if you could just talk to us a little bit about how maybe you balance your voice or struggles that you run into. Maybe we can start off with Matthew and thinking about how you often use humor, the surreal, maybe even the absurd in your work. So how do you approach humor in your work, and how do you prevent it from becoming like just a joke and blend it with the personal, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think with humor, one of the things I'm most interested in um, is creating a type of contrast and a type of tonal contrast. And so that doesn't always show up as humor, but I think humor makes it more distinct sometimes. That can be a movement from like anger to something more meditative, or a movement from certainty to doubt, or from uh, joy to confusion. But humor is a um, I find it, I think it's kind of a versatile tool. It can disrupt the reader's ability to anticipate. It can maybe make someone more comfortable with this, with subject matter that sometimes might be uncomfortable. Or it can make them sort of uncomfortable as well. It can be because it can be used as a type of criticism. So um, and often when I sit down, I don't necessarily say, oh, this will be funny, or I'm going to try to write something funny, or I'm going to try to write something sad. I kind of, those things maybe get discovered during the writing process. If something seems amusing to me or interesting to me, I assume it'll be interesting or amusing to a reader. I actually have an inability to write jokes. If I try to write an actual joke, it won't happen. So I don't necessarily know if my poems are um, like if they're. I think they're funny. Maybe they're funny for poems, but they're not necessarily funny for like stand-up comedy or something. Um, but I don't always set out to with that in mind. But if I see the opportunity for it and it feels appropriate to the poem, or inappropriate but interesting, then I try to embrace it.
I remember a few years ago that on social media you posted a headline that you discovered about like a Noah's Ark exhibit was flooded, and you wrote like, this is the poem I was meant to write because it feels like a Matthew Olsman title. And then I remember a few weeks later you're like, I couldn't do it. It didn't. And I was just kind of curious about, like, it seems like it would be a potential for a poem, but you discovered that it wasn't. I was curious about how you know it will like, it isn't going to work. Like, when do you stop yourself?
The second you started saying that, I think I knew exactly which headline you were talking about. It was about the there's I guess a biblical theme park that had built a to scale model of Noah's Ark, and then I guess they sued like the county for rain damage or something like that, which felt like uh, which sort of defeats the purpose of having an actual ark, it seemed like. But yeah, uh, there are times where where I find headlines like that, or news stories, or just situations where the poem isn't able, or I'm not able to make a poem that's more interesting than the initial headline, or doesn't do anything beyond that. Or if I finish writing that poem and the the news story is the most interesting part of the poem, then we probably don't need the poem, because we have the news headline on its own. So and how do I know if it's finished or it's not working? I don't always. Sometimes I just set things aside. I actually kind of returned to that one not too long ago. So maybe it wasn't meant for me to write in that moment, but but possibly later.
Gotcha. Ruba, do you want to talk to us a little bit about your process? You write obviously very personal poems, especially in your last collection, as well as like culturally relevant and political poems, which, risking the personal is a huge undertaking. I was wondering about what your process is as you're kind of approaching the work.
Thank you for that question, Mark, and thanks for inviting me to be here for the introductions. It's a special honor to be here reading with Matthew because he's a dear friend, and also because it's just around the time of the release of Matthew's new book. So I hope you all have your, got a copy to read. I think many times my topics choose me. I'm sort of interested in everything, and so I don't always set out to find a certain topic, but in the case of my second book, the topic was kind of inescapable. And I think in the beginning, I really did try to write around it, which was to say, I started writing some of these poems during the time when my father had fallen ill. And so this book came out of, the challenge of his 3-year battle with multiple myeloma and then our loss of him. And so I found myself trying to write around the topics of, to avoid the topics of mortality and chronic illness, because these weren't things that I, really wanted to write about. But in the end, I kind of realized I had to write through them. I couldn't write around them. The intensity of the feelings was really relentless and very personal, as you mentioned. So I found myself exhausted, as sort of like poem after poem, sort of tackling the same thing. So for myself, and hopefully, eventually for the sake of my reader, I had to find different ways into the material so that I could process it differently, render it differently, just kind of grapple with it differently. And many times, external kind of constructs came into play there, whether it was pieces of found material or, sort of devising forms for myself or working within given forms. And so that helped, just having something else to kind of focus on, I think, helped me deal with some material that was personal and also very intense.
Yeah, and so I was also thinking about especially in your latest collection, Bring Now the Angels, obviously the first half is kind of exploring that loss and that grief in a personal way. In the second half, it kind of is in communication with the first half, obviously, but it deals more with like politics and cultural loss and calls to witness. I was kind of curious about how you kind of confront the political, which is also a risky thing to do without it becoming polemical. And so I was kind of curious about how you find that balance in your work.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think an ongoing struggle. I think that I've written plenty of poems that have come off as shrill and, sort of didactic. It's an easy thing to do in a poem when you have strong feelings about something. So I've really tried to study, like what are poets doing in order to make their work, to be able to sort of put forth the ideas or questions that they have, but in a way that engages the reader instead of sort of closing them out. So that it's more of an interaction instead of just sort of like a monologue. And so I think for me, part of what I've been thinking hard about in recent years is Claudia Rankine's speech from AWP many years back now, but it's now published on AWP's website with the title "In Our Way: Racism in Creative Writing." And in it, Rankine makes a call to writers, basically to say, like, stop erasing race from your work. Let's write about it. Let's see you write about it. And so as a writer who's not white, I still tried to figure out, like, what does that mean for me? What are the ways in which there are things that I'm not representing in my work, whether that's race or other issues. So some of the questions I try to keep on the table, especially if I'm finding that I'm writing something that has a kind of political bent to it, I try to think about, what are the layers here? What are the layers of personal experience that I'm representing or trying to depict, but also like historically, culturally, what are the other aspects at play here that I might think about and bring in, in a meaningful way. And many times that does help me think about how to write about issues where, I might have a strong opinion, but to do it in a way that's not overly simplistic and maybe hopefully implies, implicates the speaker in some way. So it's not sort of like a finger pointing gesture.
I love that idea of like the layering. It's like the archaeology of the poem that you're trying to like dig into the history beyond just your experience that or the poet's experience. I love that. Matthew, you also confront political ideas about our world and our future, environmental factors in particular. So I guess I'll shoot you the same question. How do you find balance in your work to talk about those big things?
Um, yeah, so this will sound kind of similar to my answer with humor. I don't necessarily always set out to write about a specific thing. I don't always sit down to sit and say, this is going to be my poem about capitalism, or this will be my poem um, about war or something like. But the world has a way of creeping into whatever you're writing about, and um, I think it's said that there are, you know, most poems have two subjects. There's the subject you start out writing about, and the subject you kind of uncover through the writing process. And you want to leave room for that type of that discovery along the way. So, I mean, my writing process can essentially be described as I sit down in a chair and I have a computer in front of me and I type a sentence, and I I might have a phrase in my head or an image in my head or maybe a line in my head, but I don't always know what it's going to develop into. But I mean, one sentence will kind of lead to other sentences. You know, if you say, so it's not always just like, oh, this could be anything. Like if you start with like once I have one sentence, then I have then I kind of see where that leads. There's maybe a spirit of improvisation in the drafting process. Um, I used to think of improv as this thing where people would create something out of nothing when in improv theater, but it's actually like about reacting to what's around you. That's why they're often asking for a suggestion from the audience, or they're responding to their partners. But um, so I don't sit down with a whole poem in mind. I sit down with maybe a line or a sentence, and then eventually as it starts growing, suddenly something from the world sort of interjects or interrupts it, or it's like a boulder in the stream that the river has to sort of accommodate or go around. Um, and as far as finding balance, I'm not always sure that I do. So sometimes a lot of things I write feel like maybe there's a political or social situation that's only hinted at, or other times it feels like that content overwhelms the poem when I'm drafting it. So I think balance is sort of might be involve a long process of trial and error, where you're saying, you're kind of just intuitively saying, does this work? How do I feel about this? And I'm trying to respond as I'm writing it as I would a reader. So there's a kind of dual lens through which you're trying to view the thing you're making.
Absolutely. I love those ideas. Maybe we have tons of questions I think to be answered, but maybe it's time to hear your work. So Ruba, would you like to start us off and read to us for about 10 or 15 minutes from your collections?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. Okay, so the poems I'll be reading today are all from my second book, Bring Down the Angels. And as Mark described, the first half of the book is primarily about my father's battle with cancer, so very much about personal loss. And the second half of the book kind of broadens out to other types of loss, more public forms of loss. So I'll start with some poems from the first half. This one's called The Feast. My father is hosting the final picnic. He rolls a melon back and forth on the slate table to steady it and slice, each piece bleeding onto a white plate. The coals turn gray but still flicker and burn, with the raw meat slung on top of the grill, oozing blood red to clear. In the river bordering the grove, a lone man paddles his arms, stomach pressed to a blue surfboard. Black and white ripples radiate from him while boats knock against the pier. The children gathered their frisbees from grass, their volleyballs and rackets, appearing and disappearing in bright shirts like confetti. Their voices rise and fall. It is late. The sun shines, but not for much longer. The golden hour has begun. For a moment, the moss-covered trees glow lime green, frozen in their looming heights. My father, white shirt, gray pants, silver wristwatch, glasses. He always cut the melon. The plates are ready, the food is hot, the watermelon cold and seedless. And our lives, for a moment, are an untouched meal, perishable and delicious, one we've barely begun to taste. This next one is called Phase One. And this one came out of largely out of the election of 2016, when I was trying to figure out for myself how to deal with some very intense feelings. There's a lot of tension in the air. And I realized that some of the tensions I was holding within me were becoming really toxic. And so, I was thinking hard about the idea of how to work through that and how to extend a kind of compassion to what was going on around me. And thinking a lot about the idea of forgiveness. When is it possible? Is it possible? How do we work toward that? Is it warranted? When is it warranted? And I don't know that I came to any conclusions, any answers about that, but I did come across the idea of self-forgiveness as our precursor to extending compassion and forgiveness toward others. And so that idea of looking inward first made a lot of sense to me. So a lot of unresolved questions remain, but in the meantime, this poem emerged. It's called Phase One. For leaving the fridge open last night, I forgive you. For conjuring white curtains instead of living your life. For the seedlings that wilt now in tiny pots, I forgive you. For saying no first, but yes as an afterthought. I forgive you for hideous visions after childbirth brought on by loss of sleep. And when the baby woke repeatedly, for your silent rebuke in the dark, what's your beef? I forgive you for letting vines overtake the garden, for fearing your own propensity to love, for losing again your bag en route from San Francisco, for the equally heedless drive back on the caffeine-fueled return. I forgive you for leaving windows open in rain and soaking library books again, for putting forth only revisions of yourself with punctuation worked over instead of the disordered truth. I forgive you. For singing mostly when the shower drowns your voice, for so admiring the drummer you failed to hear the drum. In forgotten tin cans, may forgiveness gather, pooling in gutters, gushing from pipes, a great steady rain of olives from branches, relieved of cruelty and petty meanness. With it, a flurry of wings, 13 gray pigeons, ointment reserved for healers and prophets. I forgive you. I forgive you. For feeling awkward and nervous without reason, for bearing Keats's empty vessel with such calm, you worried you had perhaps no moral center at all. For treating your mother with contempt when she deserved compassion. I forgive you. I forgive you. I forgive you. For growing a capacity for love that is great, but matched only perhaps by your loneliness. For being unable to forgive yourself first, so you could then forgive others, and at last find a way to become the love that you want in this world. This next one is the poem from which I've taken the title of the book, Bring Now the Angels. And this is, sometimes people ask me, well, how does that idea of, thinking about the layers, how does that play out in your own work? And this is the poem I always think of, because the first version of this was very much centered on a kind of personal narrative that was called Matter of Fact. And it actually went out into the world and was published as Matter of Fact. And that one dealt chiefly with, our family's experience of grappling with a chronic illness and a terminal diagnosis. And when I went back to revise the poem, I started thinking about the fact that, my family wasn't the only one dealing with chronic illness. We weren't the only one trying to navigate hospital systems and, various specialists, many specialists, insurance, you name it. There were so many people who are also having this experience. So this later version that I wrote was my attempt to kind of, push out of that individual narrative and to think more broadly about the experience and how it might play out across a lot of different contexts. Bring now the angels. Bring now the angels to test your pulse as you sleep. Bring the healer, the howler, the listening ear. Bring an apothecary to mix the tincture. We need the salve, the tablet, the capsule of the hour. Bring sword eaters and those who will swallow fire. Fetch the guardian to flatten the wheelchair, to hoist it toward heaven. The public shuttle awaits the ceaseless trips to the clinic. To the bedside manner, summon witness. This medic's disdain toward patients, the physician's dismissal of pain. And call the druggist again to drug us senseless. Bring a nomad to index our debts, tuck each invoice into broken walls of regret. Call the cleric, the clerk, the messengers divine. Summon someone, collect the prayers, buried or burnt, tied to stones, sunken seas, dunked under water until all dissolves. Bring now the scribe, let it be written. There is no shepherd, no Sherpa, no moonlight guide for these, the darkest journeys of our lives. Who will lift the shuttle above the outposts of the living? Who will watch it rise and rise? Who will clear a path among all the wreckage? Who will weave a nest for all the birds of passage? Who will bridge the gap between savage and salvage? Who will sing over wilting stalks, rough husks, silk still gleaming like hair in a dream? This next one is a retelling of the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. And it's a poem in two voices. So you'll hear a questioner and a respondent. It's called Choke. Was there a beanstalk, a golden egg laying hen? No, just a magic seed, a courtyard of crooked men. Was there a giant? There must always be a giant. In how many ways did the giant try to choke you? He did not attempt this with his bare hands. In how many ways did the giant try to choke you? He didn't choke me. He choked the competition, flooded the market with magic seeds. Was magic involved? How else could he ensure economic chokehold? How else the power to ban sales of nature's seeds? Was magic involved? How else could he choke off a normal trade flow? How else, in revitalization's name, a new world economy? What life were you doomed to live? Must there always be doom in the developing world? What life were you doomed to live? Lifetime poverty, I was told. How did you pay 1,000 for your first bag of seeds? Alone, 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 alone. Forgive me, my children, my wife, alone. How did you know the seeds were enchanted? They only grow once. My pockets emptied without end. And what of the pesticides? The giant implied the magic seed has little need. Save your rupees, save your children. What did the seeds grow? Nothing every time. How many times did you try? Too many, then I took my life. Who weeps now over the blighted fields? My wife, my children, my God, what could I do? How many witnessed you drinking the pesticide? On our first date, we secretly strolled and tossed scraps to birds. What did the giant say when you died? From his heights, will he notice the smell of blood? Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread. Who will pay the loans now that you're dead? Please tell the world what is happening here. Okay, and for my last poem, I'll read a piece called Residue. Residue. My son's voice in the empty back seat, dried ice cream on t-shirts, my mother's gray-black hair in the dial, my love's pillow, creased, still warm, my son's backpack stuffed with weathered books, my sister's dried bouquet, petals intact, broken chain with an arrowhead, and the boy who gave it to me, how nervously I brushed him off, how callous it seems now. Photos of my sister in pigtails arriving from overseas, my mother's shari whipping in the breeze, my father's maroon vest pilled and worn, steaming cups of tea with chipped porcelain lips, frilled paper turkeys hung on hospital walls, the snowflakes, the hearts, the clovers to follow, the pizza shop's neon at night, my father's shoes by the doorway, emptied, my baby born in a blizzard. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Matthew, would you like to share some of your work with us from your newest collection? I have it here, Constellation Route, and maybe you can even at some point kind of talk about, like Ruba did, the concept of the book and how the poems are kind of connected together.
Yes. Thank you for having me here. And so I'll read a few poems from this book, Constellation Route, which is mostly epistolary poems. And I was actually rethinking the order of the poems I was going to read, because Mark had started us off by talking about humor, and then whenever that happens, I'm like, and here's my poem about the end of the planet, or something like something very bleak. But I'll start with this one. Letter to the person who, during the Q&A session after the reading, asked for career advice. The confusion you feel is not your fault. When we were younger, guidance counselors steered us toward respectable occupations: doctor, lawyer, pharmacist, dentist. Not once did they say exorcist, snake milker, or race car helmet tester. Always investment banker, IT specialist, marketing associate. Never rodeo clown, never air guitar soloist, chainsaw juggler, or miniature golf windmill maker. In this country, in the year I was born, some 3.1 million other people were also born, each with their own destiny, the lines of their palms predicting an incandescent future. Were all of them supposed to be strategy consultants and commodity analysts? Water slide companies pay people to slide down water slides to evaluate their product. Somehow that's an actual job. So is the naming of nail polish colors. Were these ever presented as options? You need to follow your passion, as long as your passion is not poetry and is definitely a hedge fund. If I could do it over, I'd suggest an entry-level position standing by a riverbank, or a middle management opportunity winding like fog through the sugar maples of New England. There's a catastrophic shortage of bagpipe players, tombstone sculptors, and tightrope walkers. When they tell you about the road ahead, they forget the quadrillion other roads. You'll know which one is yours because it fills you with astonishment or ends with you being reborn as an alpine ibex, a gravity-defying goat, able to leap 7 feet in the air, find footholds where none exist, and without imagining it could ever be anything else, scale a vertical sheet of solid rock to find some branches, twigs, or wild berries to devour. "14 letters to a 52 hertz whale. 1. Dear 52 hertz whale, because you sing at a frequency no other whales can hear, scientists have nicknamed you the world's loneliest whale. I'm sure it's unbearable out there, swimming through eternity, calling out and calling out and calling out and never getting a reply, never hearing a kind word in response. Wherever you are, I hope you're being careful. 2. Dear 52 hertz, would it be weird if I came to the ocean to visit? I haven't figured out the logistics of this, but it'd be cool to hang for a while. The problem is I don't know how to find you. I could get to the beach, but then what? If I swam out to meet you, I'd get eaten by tiger sharks. If you swam to the shore, you'd get stuck and then you'd die. Once there was a video going around the internet of a beached whale and it was dead and the villagers didn't know how to get rid of the carcass, so they tried to blow it up with a bunch of dynamite. That didn't work out too well for anyone. 3. Dear whale, it was stupid of me to mention that other whale getting blown up with all the dynamite and everything. Totally insensitive. Sorry, I have no grace. I've been told this before, that I have no grace. I apologize. I'm just trying to make conversation. I'm no good at this. Sorry. 4. Hey whale, do you ever dress up as other animals? If so, what kind? It's almost Halloween out here. I was just wondering. 5. Dear whale, Halloween was totally stupid. This one little kid came to the door dressed as a dolphin, but he had a net over him. And I said, what's with the net? And he said, every year, hundreds of thousands of dolphins and whales are killed by the tuna fishing industry because they don't know how to avoid the nets. And I thought he was insulting your intelligence. So I said, look, motherfucker, you don't know a goddamn thing about whales. Get off my porch. 6. Maybe I overreacted there. 7. Dear whale, you ever see people swimming nearby and think to yourself, I could really have some fun with this? 8. Like maybe you could surface right next to them, then yell something like, Jonah, I've been looking for you, then open your mouth really wide. 9. That's what I would do. 10. I don't know, maybe whales have better things going on. 11. Do whales believe in providence? 12. Do you ever float on your back and scrutinize the stars and see unexpected figures among them, like maybe the shapes of other whales? Do you assign them names and imagine stories for those make-believe creatures as they drift through the dark? Do those stories lend structure to your days and nights? Do they comfort the nervous waters, constellate the disjointed heavens, and render the marvelous in a manner you can endure? Do you believe them? 13. How cold is the bottom of the ocean? How crushing is the pressure down there? 14. Do you ever worry that because your voice is impossible to hear, maybe no one will make the effort, that you can work really hard and try to be a good person and try to make a difference in your community, but then at the end of the day, the waves will just swallow you whole. They will take you under. You'll disappear from the world. You won't even leave a ripple on the surface. This is a letter to Bruce Wayne. A good place to hide a drop of water is a stream. A good place to hide a stream is beneath an ocean. A good place to hide a man is among thousands of other men. Watch how they rush through the city like water through a ravine. I've searched many famous cities for you. There are 3 listings for Bruce Wayne in Houston, 2 in Pittsburgh, 1 in Miami, and 1 in LA. In Tampa, Bruce Wayne's a retired chemistry teacher. In Flagstaff, he drives a taxi and hopes to procure a diamond for his soon-to-be fiancée. A good place to hide a star is a galaxy. A good place to hide a galaxy is a universe. Look at the night sky. Justice used to be a cowl and cape, the flicker of wings under an ateliated moon, and you, like a gargoyle, crouched atop some stone edifice. To conceal a universe, place it in a multiverse, that hypothetical clutch of alternate realities. The dilemma of the word alternate is how it implies a norm, a progenitor stream from which an alternate diverges. Which is the alternate? Which is right here, right now? There is no such thing as Gotham City. but here is Gotham City, and I've been so naive, believing the truth of the old mythologies, how they promised a recognizable villain, a clown with a ruby slashed mouth, a lunatic's laugh. In the universe where I exist, supervillains look like everyone else. Give them an old flannel to wear and a square jawline to smile at the world, and suddenly they're shouting, "Get out of my country," from the window of a passing car. They're hanging a noose in the middle of our middle school bathroom. They're pulling a pistol in a crowded bar room or bus stop or the middle of the street. They could be anyone. They could be everywhere. A good place to hide a sociopath is a full-length mirror. A good place to hide that mirror is the heart of America. In the battle of good versus evil, I was so sure good would win. Now I just hope something good will survive, get a job cutting hair or selling cars, make it home in time for dinner. I suspect there's a parallel dimension where you, vigilante, long for this as well. To have a normal life is victory enough. To remain anonymous and not be spat upon on the subway. In Boston, Bruce Wayne owns a pawn shop. In Milwaukee, he plays pinochle and feeds stray cats. In New Hampshire, he goes fly fishing on the Sugar River, reels in one brook trout after another. When he removes the hook from a mouth, he might place the fish into a cooler, or he might set it back into a stream, the alternate or the original, no longer certain, in which he stands. And I'll read one more poem, and keeping with the comic book theme from the last poem. This is a letter written while waiting in line at Comic-Con. Klingon, Parseltongue, Navi. People invent imaginary languages so imaginary citizens of imaginary worlds can speak to one another. Elvish, Ewokese, Dothraki. You can learn these languages. Come to a convention with your face painted blue or a leather scabbard bolted to your back and talk to people who will understand you. I understand what language feels like when you're not understood. More than once I thought some other planet might be my home. Last week in an alley, I saw one man punch another man until neither looked like a person. There are hundreds of reasons like this to long to be from some other galaxy, century, or dimension. Reasons to put on a spacesuit or wizard's cloak and hope no one will recognize you. But it's not these costumes that amaze me. It's always been the languages, the way they reach for something that can't be said in our tongue. In the only language I know, there are not enough words for parabola or isotope, too few phrases to say I'm sorry or I'm glad that I found you. Though we've been married for years, I wish we met when we were children. If we had known each other in the year you spent alone on Earth without one friend, we could have been aliens together. I'd have those green four-fingered hands, you with your glow-in-the-dark antennae, words in the form of strange whirling noises, low chirping machine music, wisps of static, lamentations of rain. Only you and I would know what these sounds meant. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. This is a great opportunity to maybe think about, for both you guys, before we get to the audience Q&A, some of your thoughts on form. And I guess we'll start with Matthew, since you just finished your reading. Is you often write, at least in this collection, in the epistolary form, and even poems that aren't necessarily like a literal letter, they are kind of reflecting on postal terms. So I was curious about how you approach the epistolary, some pitfalls of the form, and kind of how you want to reinvent it or use it.
Yeah, so this book came about where I think I've always sort of written poems with a lot of poems with a specific audience or an idea of an audience in mind. And by audience, I'm not necessarily, or I guess there's two audiences, and I should distinguish them. There's the reader, and then there's this audience that the speaker's pretending to speak to. It's like me and my imaginary friend here. And my earliest attempts at writing poems kind of resembled unmailed letters. They were always talking to someone, or someone I couldn't talk to, or someone I didn't was no longer in contact with, or someone who I didn't know what to say in the moment, or something like that. And that's always, I think that's always been a part of writing for me, this idea that you're trying to communicate with someone, whether it's a reader on the other side, or this artificially constructed addressee that the direct address is aimed toward. And this collection kind of was a conscious attempt to sort of lean into that tendency and see what would happen. It was something that I sort of have fun doing, and so I kind of wanted to test myself. I don't always necessarily write with a project in mind. I wanted to see, so I just wanted to see what would happen if I just consciously kept doing it over and over. And I was writing other things at the same time, but I tried, whenever I got stuck, I would come back to this form. And I guess the pitfalls, the challenge of writing a lot of them is, or a collection of them, is how do you create variation when you're using a similar approach? That was most likely one of the biggest challenges, and extended the amount of time this book took to complete, because of that. Like, I realized early on that I was going to have to find different ways to approach this, or to think about it while using this sort of mode of delivery.
Absolutely. I guess I was having a similar question to Ruba. I was thinking about what you said earlier about getting into the personal, and how sometimes you have to find a kind of an angle to do that, and usually kind of like was an external angle, whether it be form or found poems or something along those lines. I was curious about if you could talk about how you use form in poetry and how you try to approach it.
Yeah, that's thanks for that question. I think when I was first starting out in writing, I used to be very dismissive about form. I think I felt like I had my own ideas. I wasn't interested in learning about formal poetry at all. And it took me some time to realize, like, there's so much for me to learn, formal poetry being just one of the things. But I also came to see formal constraints as interesting and exciting, and not sort of restrictive or stuffy or boring, which is what I had thought previously. And I think part of it is that I kind of think of writing in form as a kind of conversation, entering into a kind of conversation that's been going on for a long, long time. So if I want to write a sonnet, I'm not just writing something I'm devising, on my own. Even though I'm writing on my own, I'm entering a conversation that's very old and rich. And so it feels like there's this great opportunity then to engage in that conversation, and, to engage with it, which can mean both inhabiting the form and adhering to the parameters of the form, but also exploring ways to rethink it, whether that's through form and or through content, depending on what it is. And maybe even subvert it. That's always a fun thing to think about when it comes to given forms. So I've come to really embrace formal constraints. And I think the other part of it for me is that I've come to see that they can serve as really productive distractions, so to speak, so that if I'm grappling with something that I think I can figure out just by tackling it straightforwardly, but if I'm struggling, that's probably not going to be very fruitful. And so bringing in some formal constraints, whether it's the sonnet, or just bringing in different features from given poems, given forms, that can help me discover things in my writing that I wouldn't have discovered otherwise, because my brain is preoccupied with syllabic count or metrical stresses, or thinking about how to rhyme certain words. And in the process, different things happen. So I find that process really exciting and interesting.
Yeah, I was thinking about your Jack and the Beanstalk poem too, right? It was like you're taking this found form, and if without that form, you would be kind of like maybe talking to it too straight on, but putting it into another genre allows it to like kind of open up in a new way. I thought that was great. So thinking about our Q&A, we have a question here about process related, I suppose, but it's for both of you. And it says, how do you break out of the mold of writer's block? And our audience member uses a metaphor here, like a painter who runs out of paint and starts using the same blue paint for trees and grass. And so I guess it's like thinking about variation, like you were talking about, Matthew. Like how do you break out of that blockage? Matthew, do you want to start maybe?
I think one of the things that helps me not encounter writer's block, and I think of writer's block as just there are times when I'm not writing well, but I always feel like I'm able to sit down and write. And And part of that is that I love the process of revision so much. So that takes some of the pressure off, because I don't necessarily sit down thinking I have to write something good. I just have to write a thing. And then once I have a thing, I can go back and I can tinker with it forever, or I can make huge changes. And that's part of the fun of it to me. If it's just like some 4 plain sentences and, you know, a single quatrain, I can like make those sentences maybe more interesting. I can start somewhere else. I can add a stegosaurus to it. I can, it feels like this, once I have something written in revision, like the types of all sorts of possibilities start at opening up. So that's something that's really, really helped me get around writer's block. Just getting rid of some of those voices in your head that when you sit down, the idea that you have to write something good right now, you only have to write something good right now if you're not going to spend, like, you know, the next several months revising it. Then if this 10 minutes or hour that you're writing is the only poem you're going to write, or you're not going to touch it again, then there's a type of pressure that I feel, and that I would feel in that moment. But knowing that I have the ability to keep changing it, it just becomes it feels kind of liberating and free to sit down and just put something on the page. I just like making things too. So the process itself is sort of its own reward in a way.
Yeah. Ruba, do you have some advice as well? Oh, I think you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, I think I have a similar approach in that I feel like writer's block happens for me when I have a lot of expectations for a piece, or I'm putting a lot of pressure on something. And so I try to go back to Anne Lamott's idea of shitty first drafts from Bird by Bird. And so if I can convince myself, like, I'm writing a shitty first draft, no one else has to see it, then I can approach the writing in a way that's much freer than if I sit down. You know, sometimes I sit down and I think of something that I've written that I've edited heavily and, you know, feel like I've brought to fruition. And I kind of think, I'm never going to do that again. You know, that's never going to happen again. Oh, well. So I have to go back and remind myself and look at my drafts. And often I realize, like, oh, I've been working on that poem, not just for weeks, but for months or years. You know, like the germ of the idea is in a very, very messy draft, hardly recognizable some time back. So I think for me, I have to really just give myself the freedom to mess around and, you know, to experiment, and to not feel like I know where I'm going with the poem. But, you know, going back to Matthew's idea of discovery, that idea of discovering a poem is really important. So, you know, sometimes I will use prompts. If I'm having writer's block, I'll say, all right, you know, I'm going to try out some prompts from this poetry website, or I might give myself a time constraint. And so, you know, to take some of the pressure off in that way, to say, all right, I'm just generating material. I'm setting a timer for 10 minutes. And that can release some of the, you know, expectation and pressures around, you know, creating something that feels polished or finished, which is certainly not going to happen, not for me on the first attempt.
And we actually have a specific question for you, Ruba, and this is kind of corresponding to the spacing in your poem. It says, today I noticed you use spacing differently. What's your intention behind the spacing, and what emotional effects do these types of spacing have? And I'm just putting a picture of the kind of spacing I think that they're referring to from Bring Now the Angels, in which is kind of like using the white space. I guess, what's your intention behind that, and how does that how does the form speak to the content of the poem?
It's a good question. Thank you, Winston, for the question. I think in this one, I felt a certain kind of rhythm in my mind that I was trying to, you know, sort of score the way someone might score music. So, you know, I'm not a musical person, but I was trying to play around with the spacing and the line breaks in order to approximate that kind of rhythm I was hearing in my head. And the rhythm was one of sort of like insistence and repetition, and a kind of halting, you know, hesitation or halting kind of feel. So, you know, in terms of my intention, I guess those are some of the things I was trying to get at. In terms of the emotional effects, it's a good question. I think part of what I might have been trying to get at was just the difficulty around, you know, both what the poem is expressing, but also the difficulty around making some of these utterances and having to sort of face the challenges at, in such a multifaceted way. So I think, I'm not sure how clear of an answer that is, but those were some of the things I was playing around with.
We only have a couple more minutes, and so maybe we can end kind of with thinking about Matthew's first poem he read, and a few people in the chat were talking about how much they identify with it. And this is the Q&A session of the reading. And often it deals with advice for young writers and poets. So I was curious if you have just kind of any go-to advice that you have for people who are starting out in this writing world. Ruba, do you want to maybe start us off?
Sure. I think for writers who are just starting off, I would encourage you to, read widely, read as much as you can get your hands on, and think of every poem. I find it helpful to think of every poem as an instructor, as a teacher. There's something that every poem can teach us, whether that's, a kind of formal tool or something about the way the content is revealed. And so, or even if it's a poem we don't like, I think sometimes when we have a really strong reaction to a poem, those are the ones that are really instructive to, in terms of spending some time with them and unpacking what's going on here. And to keep writing, to kind of find ways to push past all the doubt and, uncertainty that is involved in writing, and find the spaces that support you, whether that's taking classes or just making your own writing group or just exchanging poems with one friend, once a month or whatever works for you, but finding the spaces and supports that will help you keep doing what you love to do.
Matthew, I suppose you wrote a poem about it, so your answer is right there in the work, but do you have anything specific that you could share with us?
I think for writers that are starting out, or even writers that have been writing for a while, it's good to focus or refocus yourself on things that make writing fun or interesting or fulfilling. I think in poetry especially, there's a tendency to sort of mythologize the sort of tortured artist, or like the kind of brooding poet that's writing from some pit of despair, and that's fine, but I think there's a lot of things that a lot of places poetry can come from, and there's a lot of, most people that go into a type of art they'll go into it because it brings them some sort of fulfillment, or leads them to a space of wonder sometimes, and I think it's worth focusing on those things too, like what made you like poetry in the first place, because after a while I've seen a lot of writers start to get sort of caught up in, is this poem good or bad, or how many rejection letters I'm collecting, or do people understand my writing, or am I publishing enough, or whatever. And when most of your writing life is just going to be like you sitting alone at a desk, and that's going to sound not great to a lot of people, unless you're the type of person that's like, yeah, I love sitting alone at a desk. And that happens if you're able to take the things that made you want to become a poet in the first place, and sort of embrace those and celebrate those things. So that, I guess that would be my advice for folks starting out.
Both of you guys have wonderful advice, and our chat has been very lively with compliments and questions and interpretations of your work, and it's much appreciated on our end. So just thank you so much. It's been an honor spending an hour with you guys at a desk and talking to you about your work. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks. All right, bye guys. If you are curious about our reading series, I put it in the chat here. We have a link of the remaining 8 readings. Next week we have Amy Hempel is going to be joining us, and then the following week is going to be Maggie Smith and Ada Limon. So we have good readers on the horizon, so stay tuned. All right, thank you guys. I really appreciate it.